Welcome, Rabbi Joseph. It is good to see you again. How are you?
Well, I'm engaged in finishing my the editing tasks and responsibilities of my second volume on Paul Ricoeur, um,
Oh,
edited with Jim Moore and Mark Wallace, Refiguring the Sacred: Conversations with Paul Ricoeur, a 25-year companion volume of Mark Wallace's original Figuring the Sacred. New essays, including two new essays by Paul Ricoeur himself. So, you know what it's like when you get to the very end and all you're doing is reading and rereading. Yes, I'm fine.
well, if you have a a PDF of this manuscript that you would like to share in advance of a podcast conversation about this book, by all
I'll, I'll
means.
check with I'll check with my co-editors and let you know.
Um, so, Joseph, you sent me an article that you wanted to talk about, and it dovetails with Chuck Schumer's words to the Senate um, recently as well. And so the article is about whether um, Jews need to start thinking about um, um,
Hiding.
con- concealing their identity. Yeah.
Yeah. This morning, two more articles. One in Haaretz about Israeli academics that now say they are being denied access or being ignored. The other in the forward that the Department of Education initiated reviews of more universities and the problem of anti Semitism.
Yeah.
uh, what Chuck Schumer said, the highest ranking Jew to ever reach the level of a party leader in the United States Senate. I understand. Let me share with you an experience I had last Sunday. My
Okay.
soon to be 7-year old grandson competed in his first competitive soccer tournament in Brazil. Now, you have to understand football in Brazil is something no North American understands. Here, football was created by the Holy One, so the Holy One could give the world Pele.
Mm.
So when you're watching 7-year olds play soccer for the first time in a tournament, okay, I've set the stage. This is a tournament of Jewish children, primarily
Okay.
from Jewish day schools throughout Rio de Janeiro. And it was played at the Hebraica Club, the oldest Jewish community center in Rio de Janeiro, across the street from the day school where our grandchildren go. An armed guard outside. You go in, all your bags are checked, and metal detectors, another armed guard. This is for just less than 200 people and
Yeah. Yeah.
children in Rio. We go in, and it's called the Maccabea, the Hebrew word for like Olympics. And there is the Hebraica Maccabea, and my grandson has his foot on the ball. He's going to kick the first ball, and they begin the tournament with singing Hatikva, the Israeli national anthem. And I start to cry, tear up, realizing that I am a lifelong Zion. And I have raised four adult children who are Zionists. They've all been to Israel, three of them studied in Israel. And there is my eldest grandson, another Zionist. You think of yourself suddenly in a moment unexpected. 7 or 8 minutes into the first game, watching 10 7 year olds, I said to myself, there, but for happenstance, the grace of God. If these 7 year olds were playing in Israel, and I was the grandfather watching in Israel, they would all be on a list considered by Hamas either to be victims or kidnapped. How do I translate that to you and anyone listening?
Mhm.
That is what Chuck Schumer was saying. We experience this within the diaspora, much as the young author of the second article, should I wear my Star of David? Are Christians worried about wearing a cross, a crucifix? Yes, there is increased horrible stress and tension among Palestinians, the horrible shooting in Vermont, among Muslims, Arabs. But we are 15.8 million people holding tenaciously onto a scripture, a theology, and a monotheism which gave birth to Christianity and Islam. We are minuscule in the construct of two Western dominant faiths. And I can't explain to you, and I trust you, what it was like to stand and watch my 7 year old grandchild and have the fear, if I had been in Israel, if God forbid he had been in Israel. So, what is it like every day to wait for hostages to be released for 3 times the number of Palestinian prisoners, and to realize, as we've been told now, the leaders of Hamas came and sat with those who had been kidnapped and told, you won't be harmed. This was all part of the plan. We will return you. I sent you an essay about, within Jewish tradition, what the release of hostages means.
Yeah.
All the way back into scripture, we've dealt with this. But what does it mean for these children, mothers, elderly, to come back to a world after 50 days or more, to be told, no, I'm sorry, your mother was killed, your father was killed. No, they're still in hostage. And given the disaster in Gaza, a military choice made by Israel, now people saying, and it was that choice, that disaster, that pushed Hamas into the corner to release these hostages.
The the essay you sent me, Our Captive Heritage. Talk a little bit. So it begins by um, tracing this idea of captivity and the imperative, the mitzvah, uh, to redeem captives. Um, it's not only it not only goes back to the prophet Jeremiah, but to the Abraham and Sarah narrative. Talk about how important this is in just the history and tradition of Judaism.
You froze there.
How much of it did you hear anything?
Nothing. You froze. It was a couple of minutes. Something
uh,
about the essay you sent, and then
yeah,
I lost.
the essay you sent begins by talking about um, the experience of captivity and the imperative, the mitzvah, to redeem captives, how it goes all the
Correct.
way back, not only to Jeremiah, but to the Genesis narrative.
Yes.
So talk about just how ingrained the experience of being taken hostage is, and how important securing their release is to the religion.
The religion, the culture, the ethics, the theology, the norm. We go back to the question of Lot uh, in the Genesis narrative, even the Genesis narrative of uh, Sarai being taken. We know early on that the family's vulnerability is when a member of the family is taken. And it's very clear that in the earliest norm of the family, Abram's, anything necessary to return the family to its norm. A wife, a nephew. And so we get inside scripture paradigms that will be used later throughout the Hebrew Bible. But the rabbis interpret it to be careful here. Because if you offer the ransom, you are giving those who do this the behavioral instinct to keep doing it,
Yeah.
and hence the contemporary policy or protocol. We don't negotiate with terrorists. We understand that the terrorists need the leverage of our morality.
That's a good way to put it.
They know we don't do this. There might be lots of other things you can complain about. Administrative detention, merely throwing rocks, merely throwing Molotov cocktails, keeping people in prison who don't have access to the evidence. Okay, all of it unacceptable. But the IDF does not go into homes, kidnap people from their beds, and you don't know where they are. I don't know the question of what will happen after we finish women and children. We have another 48 hours. Maybe there are still as many as 20 women and children. We've been told horrifically that one family, a mother, a 10-month-old, and a 4-year-old, were killed. Is it true? Is it part of the psychological warfare? At what point, when you're done with the most vulnerable, does the exchange of 3-to-1 change to 5-to-1, 10-to-1, 100-to-1? At what point is the rabbinic fear, don't pay a ransom beyond the value of a life? I read that and was afraid to send it to you. Actually, there's a moment in Jewish tradition where someone would say, don't determine a ransom that is above the value of a life. I wouldn't know what to do with that. So, yes, we are a people, a community, an ethically constricted community. This is not about policies. This is internal to our basic ethical norm. We know people get kidnapped. It's an ancient form of warfare. Redeeming the captive is, as you say, a mitzvah, a commandment. So we will keep giving them 3-1, 5-1. And when we get to the IDF, men and women, those who serve in the Israeli Defense Forces, is there a number beyond which we will go? All planned, all part of the Hamas calculation.
The article you sent, it also points out that the reason the IDF are able to fight so boldly is because of the confidence they have in Israel redeeming them from captivity should they be taken hostage.
Yes. Look, Zionism is a philosophy born out of hatred of Jews. It is not a colonialist, racist philosophy. It is a capitulation to the Western acknowledgement that we don't belong anywhere. Those of us who live in various diasporas have been aware now for more than 7 weeks the fragility of the choices we've made. So, those who are tired of our telling our story, hence what prompted Chuck Schumer to make the statement at the US Senate, you're not listening to what the Jewish community is saying.
Yeah. I read, Joseph, uh, an article yesterday that Barry Weiss shared, and it was about two Jewish women from the Netherlands, one native born, one an immigrant from Somalia. And they were talking about um, the need to understand that some of the anti immigration sentiment in Europe is is a response to uh, a rising anti-Semitism in European countries by um, Islamist immigrants. Is that is that a thing that Jews like are aware of? Think about.
We're aware of it. I think what Bari has noted is not dissimilar from Professor Susan Neiman, a philosopher who's lived in Germany for many years. Europe's culture is the
Well,
core.
before I forget, like I thought of that article when you shared the story about your grandson at the beginning because one of the women notes being at a professional soccer game where a
Mhm.
segment of the audience are chanting "Gas the Jews" during the soccer game.
Yes. Look, we in America have, in much shorter time, created a culture in which our own relationship to anti Semitism and fear often don't permit American Jews to see the nuances of what's happening in Europe. The issues of the Islamists fear France, The Marshall Plan worked. Do you know who all the workers were who did all that work? Turks.
Hmm.
They brought people to do the work. The number of males that had been destroyed. So, since World War II, there's not just a new influx of Muslims, there's a basic generational shifting of Muslims that Europe had to have in rebuilding itself. A recent interview with a Syrian refugee in Denmark, in which the woman is shocked after 5 years to be told she is not eligible for citizenship. She has not learned the language. She works tangentially and horrified when asked, "We saved your life. Why don't you go back to Syria?" I don't, as an American, fully appreciate the Islamic fear, and we misuse Islamic phobia as if it suggests more than mere fear. No, they're not afraid of Muslims. They're already prejudiced against Muslims.
Hmm.
So uh, I think these two women are helping us understand, though the European construct of anti Semitism is fueled differently. France, the UK, smaller countries, the anti Semitism's increase is comparable. The sources of that increase have to be investigated differently. What is shocking America today is the increase on university campuses for students and for faculty.
Mm-hmm.
That was a place of reason. That was a place where we should assume that our differences will not impede us, will not exclude us, will not make us think twice. Do I belong here? We forget that many of the elite universities in our country had quotas. If they let in Jews, how many would they let in? That is no longer permitted. So I was surprised and remain shocked every day. Today, a new article in Haaretz that Israeli academics now are beginning to say they're ignoring us, they're rejecting us, our access to the world of research has changed since
Hmm.
October 7th. If we want more hostages, at what point will Israel be forced into a corner and a permanent ceasefire forced upon it, irrespective of the role Hamas will continue to play?
Mm-hmm.
And then I ask myself, oh, I wonder, is that what Putin is now waiting for in order to say, you see, if I play the long game, they will do the same and permit me to keep what I took?
Yeah. Joseph, so um, for people listening to this, watching it, um, listening to you, are there places, because you're you, you're frequently putting before me articles and essays that I would not have happened across on my own. Are there places that you encourage people to find information beyond just the the mainstream American press?
The forward is now the Daily Forward was the Yiddish press. It's now translated in English, and it's one of the most important uh, consistent sources of Jewish news in English. Haaretz, Haaretz, is the Israeli daily, considered by Israelis to be their equivalent to the New York Times. I read both of those every single day. There is also the Times of Israel. Look, uh, let me give you an example from my youngest child's life that I often use because it taught me something I was unaware of.
Okay.
Talia, who now teaches public school, would often ask me sometime after Thanksgiving to drop her off at Target near our home in Minneapolis. When do you want me to come back? I'll call you. What would she do at Target? She would count the number of Hanukkah cards in juxtaposition to the number of Christmas cards.
Hmm.
In order to remind herself of why she would now hear more than 3 weeks of nothing but Christmas songs. It's how a Jewish teenager, now a Jewish adult, came to understand what it means to literally be on the margin. She never translated that experience as one of anti Semitism. Simple social arithmetic. Well, Dad, want to know the differential this year? Jews who ask the question, as you asked a little while ago, should I or should I not wear the Star of David? It is not a new lesson for us. That we are excluded because we are Jews, we understand this. That others don't know, this is a fact we live every day of our lives, combating to greater or lesser degrees. The first time I was on this podcast, I asked, how much does your church spend on security? And you said, for nursery school? No, I said to open the doors for services. So, how do I help you or anyone listening understand I can create a new on list resource of all the articles you have to read? But Jews live it,
Mm.
not because we invited it, not because we think we're stronger because of it. We live it because we're Jews. It
Yeah.
doesn't make us the chosen people. But because we're the chosen people, parents teach their children in the same horrible way children must learn from parents who are Black, African American. When a police car stops you, get as serious as you can and never move your hands without being told to. Jewish parents give the same kind of lesson, not because all police are inherently
My family and I, we did a little shopping and went to the movies on Black Friday at the giant mall here in Northern Virginia, Tyson's Corner. And because it was packed, we parked across the street at a hotel parking lot rather than trying to fight the shopping parking. And when we left after the movie in the late afternoon, um, there was a fairly big protest of pro-Palestinian folks, um, you know, beating on buckets with megaphones, some of them shouting from the river to the sea. Um, and we had to walk through that to get to our car. And it was it was unnerving for just a few moments for us. But it made me think about what it is to negotiate life for someone like you.
I was talking to a dear friend last night, retired academic, and we were talking about that phrase. Yes, it can mean an aspirational element, but it's translated pretty reasonably as a commitment to eliminationist behavior. I am, by my nature, interested in hearing what I don't want to talk about.
Hmm.
And that will make me read something or listen to something and then talk about what I didn't think I wanted to talk about. But if I tell you, gee, what you've said is inappropriate, you're misusing that word. Be careful. And you continue to do it, I might ask, if the relationship is important, did you misunderstand what I tried to explain? The word genocide, as created by Lemke, refers to a state oriented, intended eliminationist policy. It does not refer to a quantified example of war. From the river to the sea, Israel is genocidal. So, does that mean we stop listening? Because the words now no longer have meaning.
Yeah.
But I have a new friend who just said walking through that was jarring.
And and I think part of it was jarring is just to see so many young people about my own son's ages, who, you know, could, if my sons were a little bit younger, quite possibly go to the same schools as them. And they're just animated by on a unexamined prejudice.
Propaganda works.
Yeah,
Goebbels
yeah.
is right, entirely right. If you can control the story, Trump is right. Any news, even when it's about me being on trial, is better than no news about me. So, charisma, social affect, horrible pictures. Horrible, horrible pictures. I don't have a way of discussing this without becoming defensive.
Yeah.
I am not sure what the community that is called moral today means when it says what Hamas did was horrible. How long do you wait? A week, 10 days, 2 weeks? What Israel is doing is not justified by what Hamas did. No. Why can't there be two distinct realities?
Mhm.
There isn't a vocabulary that correctly guides us in understanding October 7th and its aftermath, as we hear what the surviving hostages are now telling us. This was intended to permanently traumatize, not begun to understand what Israel will ever do again. By what border will an Israeli live?
Yeah.
And there's another scenario in which contemporary warfare has destroyed the physicality of life in a dense urban refugee center. Both use the word horrible. We don't mean the same thing.
Yeah. You mentioned your daughter and Hanukkah, which is coming up in 8 days. Um,
Yes, yes, coming up on the 7th of December.
so, um, put on your rabbi hat, um, and if you know, how will you be interpreting the texts around Hanukkah in light of the last 2 months?
First, let me thank you because now, as a quick matter of interfaith dialogue, please don't hum kumbaya. Let me tell everyone and anyone listening Hanukkah is not and should never be compared with Christmas. It is
Hmm.
a minor, non scriptural festival in which the Maccabees, 1, 2, 3, and 4, are not even included in Jewish scripture. So, this is the most minor, inconsequential festival. It has been upped in a post World War II North American sociology. It is about the Hasmoneans who fight a civil war during the Ptolemean period, 168 to 165, before the Common Era. The Greek Assyrians took and destroyed the ancient temple. They brought pigs into the temple. They wanted the then Judeans to, quote, stop being different.
Yeah.
The Hasmoneans fought a war for the purpose of being different. And they went back into the temple to cleanse it. And that's where we get the word Chanukah, which is Hebrew for dedication or rededication. Now, the history melds into legend. And they went to relight the light, and there was a small battle of oil, which, miracle of miracles, wonder of wonders, lasted not one night, but 8 nights. Okay. Fine, great. So we get a winter lighting festival. Gee, a little bit of syncretism there because I think it doesn't matter when Jesus of Nazareth is born. It
No.
is essential that he die near Passover. Hence, Easter and Passover are necessarily inextricably linked. But maybe Christmas was added because during the winter solstice, the ancient Greeks liked to run through the forest with torches, throwing wine on the torch. Whoosh! Okay. So on the winter solstice, we like to add light to the northern hemisphere's recognition of darkness. Hence, you have lights on your Christmas tree, and I light Hanukkah candles, always at a different time of year. Next year, the first night of Hanukkah will coincide with Christmas. This year, it comes very early. Okay, I will be careful in interpreting the text of Hanukkah to make sure that none who hear me misunderstand that the Hasmoneans were zealots, fanatics, much like some of the fanatics in Bibi's government. Look, Hanukkah is a wintertime festival in which we share a moment to stop and think about what it costs to be different in a 21st century assimilationist community in which lots and lots of people have, post Black Friday, forgotten what it means to be Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Sikh, Buddhist, Hindu, etc., etc.
That's a good. I mean, I think even Christians don't really. I mean, what you said about Hanukkah being a post World War II, yeah, that even prior to the Victorian era, Christmas was not what Christmas is now for Christians. That also is a sociological development. I remember years ago, before I got cancer, I spent a lot of time in Guatemala doing mission work during Advent and seeing the relative lack of importance uh, uh, of Christmas for Christians in that part of the world. So that it is these sociological differences are different than the tradition itself, and we don't often see that given our own time and space. Um, but the stories in the Book of Maccabees, in the Christian Apocrypha, um, they're not scripture for Protestants either, but they are helpful in understanding this this history that Jews have experienced and continue to experience, um, that really gives context to the what the the environment in which Jesus begins his ministry in the Gospels.
Let me think of this. I'm not even sure that I can be confident in agreeing with you. I don't know that Hanukkah was observed by the Judean Jesus and
Oh, I
his
don't mean that.
disciples.
I don't mean that. I just mean that intertestamental literature, um,
Mm-hmm.
uh, unpacks some of the political context in which first century Jews are looking for deliverance.
Absolutely. Look, the power of the Greek Assyrian partnership is not unlike the power that early Christians decided to engage with Rome.
Mm, mm,
Uh, those who have no power and want to achieve and sustain their status always look outside of themselves. Hamas needs Iran. So we are always looking to that source of power. So Jesus and his disciples, whatever that experience might have been that's so very difficult to pull out of any scripture. All right. They understood because Rome owned Judea. What was it? An independent Judean reality? No. Those who ran the temple also understood who the ultimate source of power was. Who is the ultimate source of power in the Middle East today? America, Saudi Arabia, Iran. I don't know who the ultimate source of power is. Everyone is asking, how much further can America push Netanyahu and Israel? Would they ultimately go too far? What is too far? So, yes, it would be nice to be able to know that Hanukkah has a historical specificity, but it is a paradigm that is still shareable. What does the battle of assimilation ultimately mean? I don't know. What does it mean that there is no Thanksgiving in Brazil, but every store I pass has Black Friday sales? And I laugh to myself, what are you doing? What are you doing? But Black Friday and online sales doesn't need an actual explanation and social context. Maybe that's what we have to learn. When you have to stop and explain, excuse me, there is no Black Friday without Thanksgiving Thursday. What do you mean? Of course there is. Is there a Hanukkah without a Christmas? Why do I always have to explain that Hanukkah is not the Jewish Christmas? Hanukkah precedes chronologically, but not in cultural anthropology.
Yeah, yeah.
So there were probably Jewish families that walked through the same protest you did on Black Friday.
I'm sure.
And they wondered, isn't it curious? We could be here on Black Friday and all of us shared in the Black Friday-ness of a post-Thanksgiving day. And we all did the same thing. We went to a movie and maybe shopped a little.
Or,
and you know what?
Or we're all worshiping the invisible hand of the market.
There you go. And so were the pro-Palestinians, who understood if we have this protest here in this place, the most people will see us. Wow. We get capitalism at its height.
Yeah.
And the use of propaganda, figuring out how to use capitalism at its height. Will there be, because there are Chanukiot, Hanukkah menorahs in so many communities, will they be destroyed, desecrated? Look, I I don't know how Christians look at Jews today without putting on the lens of Israel. And that was not true on October 5th and 6th.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Jewish community is aware of that.
Yeah. Well, Joseph, thank you for making time.
You're welcome. Maybe I'll bring a Chanukiah on next week and show you what it's like to light our lights. Let me
So,
make sure you and anyone listening hear one thing from me. It is important, if you have Jewish friends, if you have Jewish coworkers, if you have neighbors, that you say hello and ask, "How are you doing?"
that's good advice. That's good advice. I will ask. I will ask you that next week.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Enjoy your day.
You too. Bye bye, Jason.